Thanks so much, Olaf. Thanks to Nimrod, and appreciate you having me. This is my first time joining the Methods Day, and I was told that it's okay if I don't speak about methods. So I hope that maybe this could be a little bit of a refresher, although some of the tools, there are AI tools out there that can help you with methods as well. So yeah, we can keep that in mind. But yeah, I want to talk about how AI can power the next generation of science and actually using real AI tools, not kind of theoretical, up in the sky discussions around AI, but actually really practical tools that can help you with your research starting tomorrow. Now we're short on time, so I won't be able to go through everything, but I am running a boot camp for free over the course of January. So anyone who wants to do a deeper dive into AI tools for research, you are welcome to. I think you can just Google AI tools boot camp, Avi Staiman, and it should come up, and you can go ahead and register and sign up. It's free. So as Olaf mentioned, I'm the CEO of Academic Language Experts. I also am a chef, which is actually an editor at the Scholarly Kitchen, which is a leading news magazine for the scholarly publishing industry. And in addition, I'm also a member of Kangaroo, which is a consortium of publishers, funders, researchers, and higher education professionals trying to come up with policy around responsible AI use in research. Okay, so let's get straight to it. So first of all, it's important to understand, we probably have all had experience with working or playing around with ChatGPT, which is a great tool. There's a lot you can do with it, but it's important to understand that there's a very vast world out there of different kinds of tools for all sorts of uses within the higher education landscape, learning and teaching, whether it's data analysis or literature reviews or writing out your research. There's a lot of different tools out there. So they are kind of the big generic tools, which we'll discuss in a minute. And then there are some more specific tools that are specifically created oftentimes by researchers for researchers that are definitely worth considering familiarizing yourself with so that you can use them, become more efficient, and do your research even better. Oh, I'm going the wrong way here. Let's plow forward. Okay, so my approach and the way I look at AI is that AI should be invited to every meeting that we have. And by every meeting I have, it could be any stage of research or any particular task in front of us. And when I say it should be invited to the meeting, it should mean that we should get into a habit of asking ourselves, can artificial intelligence help us with a particular task at hand at the moment? Now, sometimes the answer to that question will be yes. Sometimes the answer to that question will be no. But these tools can be incredibly powerful in helping us with our research, and therefore we should be aware of their capabilities and know how to use them. But first, we need to understand kind of how they work, because once we understand how they work, then we can do a better job of understanding where they're going to be appropriate and where they're not going to be appropriate. And in fact, some of the things that I see when I do my trainings is that oftentimes researchers are trying to use large language models in an incorrect way. And instead of actually, and essentially the way I look at it is they are trying to use a hammer to bake a cake, right? So it's a really great tool that they're using, but they're not using it the right way. They get frustrated because maybe it gives hallucinations or misinformation, and then they ask themselves, well, what's the point of this tool? So I'm going to try and, in the time that we have available to us, try and break down some of these tools and explain how they work. So the first tool that I'd like to look at is really ChatGPT or any of the large language models, whether if you work with Claude or Microsoft Copilot, doesn't really matter. They all work on the same premise. And the way that the large language models work, the way I like to think about it is it's like Wordle on steroids. So what I mean by that is it ingested a tremendous amount of content from different content sources across the internet. Some would say most of the internet that it's ingested. And it is, through algorithmic chunking, is actually understanding the connections between different words. And so essentially, when we are prompting ChatGPT, what we're getting out as a response is the statistical probability of which words would be strung together in order to make a sentence that both makes sense and actually responds in some way to the prompt that we have given it. Now, that being said, that doesn't mean we're necessarily going to get an factually correct answer, because it is not a information model, it is a language model. We have to conceptualize it like that. So the way that I recommend using ChatGPT and similar models is more as a creative tool. Think about it like an artist with a blank canvas, and don't think about it like a technology tool that is binary and either works or doesn't work. It's not a zero sum game. So and there's a lot of creative work that we do within our day-to-day research, right? We might be brainstorming research questions. We might be trying to come up with different methods in order to test a hypothesis, and we want to think through the different methods. We might want to test out, if we have a published paper, we might want to share something on social media about it. And so all these things are creative expressions that, yes, obviously they have to be accurate and reliable, but no, they don't necessarily need to. We don't necessarily need to draw the information from them in order to come to a successful conclusion. So the reason I compare it to Wordle is because in the game Wordle, hopefully many of you, if not all of you, have played Wordle in the past. The way Wordle works is you have to guess a certain, letters and try to make up a word or try to come up with the word that's hiding behind the closed door. And as you get more letters and more, information, you have more ability to actually come to the right answer. And it's very similar when it comes to interacting with large language models. So let me give you an example. If I gave you the word they and I said, please complete my sentence, my guess is you would turn to me with a blank face and say, well, there's millions of potential sentences that could be used that could be, continue from the word they. But if I gave you the sentence, they wanted to go to the park even though it was raining, and then asked for the last word, well, you would have a much better ability to answer or to complete my sentence, because the number of potential possibilities or options or words that would come at the end of that sentence is much less than our initial example with the word they. So that's how I want you to think when you go about using tools like ChatGPT, because what you're trying to do is you're trying to give it as much detail as possible so that the total number of possible answers that it could give as a result would be reduced or be more focused on potentially the right answer. Now, there's a lot of common misconceptions around the use of these tools. Number one is people try to use it as a personalized Wikipedia and try to ask questions, get factual answers. As we've mentioned, this isn't necessarily a good use of traditional generative large language models. Oftentimes, I hear people talking about it as a replacement for scientists, so I can reassure you that, as someone who plays around and works and trains researchers and research institutions on how to use these tools, it is definitely not replacing scientists anytime soon. It does some incredible things that can really help you in meaningful ways, but it can also create new problems, which you now need to learn how to deal with, and it definitely needs a high level of oversight. So think about it more as being a research manager when you're using these tools, as opposed to the tools doing the work themselves. Oftentimes there's expectations of consistency, right? Either it works or it doesn't work. We need, again, to think about these as more of a blank canvas where we can be creative and think together about how it might work. And finally, and this is for kind of the teachers in the room, we need to understand that it can't always be detected accurately. So there are different tools on the market that try to promote themselves as the tool that can, accurately and coherently, detect whether a text that has been written is AI written, and those tools aren't always reliable. I've seen studies say, some of these tools get up to 90% accuracy, but even 90% accuracy, I don't believe is high enough to be reliable in this context. So where did it get all its information from? Right, when I'm chatting with ChatGPT, where's this all coming from? And the answer is it's a big mix. It's actually what I would call a polluted mix, because on the one hand, we have reliable sources such as PLOS, right? PLOS is an open access journal, really great content, tons of content available online. And I don't think, aside from the legal ramifications, I don't think any of us would have an issue asking a question and getting a reliable answer from the PLOS database. However, it's not just PLOS that it's drawing from, right? It's also drawing from the New York Times. Okay, so that's a little bit more subjective news editorial, though hopefully that's fact-checked as well. But you also have things like Reddit that make up a lot of the ChatGPT database that is being fed back to us in the outputs. Now, we don't actually know exactly which tools are being used to train or which tools are being used on the back end. But there was a really fascinating article in the Washington Post which did a bit of reverse engineering and was able to pick up on some of the tools that were being used, or some of the sites, some of the content sources that were used in order to train OpenAI's algorithm for ChatGPT. And those tools are really, and these sources, are a mixed bag. Some of them are better, some of them are worse. So, what are good and bad ways to work with generative AI, and how we supposed to understand, right? How are we supposed to interact and engage when we're prompting and when we're asking questions? So, there are good ways to use it. I like to call them genius ways, and there are also what I like to call idiotic ways of using it. First of all, a genius way is when you give it to find material. So instead of asking it to actually look into its own memory and give you an answer, give it the sources, the materials, right? If you're trying to, let's say, I don't know, put together a discussion section of your article, well, maybe you want to give it some other sources that you know are important in this context. You want to give it, your own theories, your own hypotheses. You want to check, well, in what ways did my study actually confirm some of the previous studies, and which ways did it contradict, or in which ways did it differ? Well, if I want to do that, I can actually feed ChatGPT the particular articles that I want it to look at, and then ask it to do that analysis, as opposed to just asking it from its own memory, in which case it won't access the materials that I actually want or need. Number two is in reformulating or assisting in rewriting a text. So this could be that I want it to be written for further clarity or grammar. Maybe I got feedback from the reviewer too that wants me to change all sorts of things. Or maybe I am helping with putting together a grant, and that grant application is a challenge because I need to fit it into the rubric of the funding body. Well, I can do a lot of creative work of taking texts that already exist and reforming them, um, um, constructing them to meet the particular goal that I'm looking to do. Thirdly is assisting in secondary creative work. So creating, a logo or a drawing or an image to go along with whatever text I've created. That can be a really good use case, a really great way to use these kinds of tools. And fourth is different kinds of language tasks. So it's really great. It can be really great with translation when prompted correctly, transcribing text, right? So if you have, if you do qualitative work and you do a lot of transcription. There's some really great tools out there for AI transcription tools, and also editing, whether it's language editing or content editing, can be really good use case of using AI. What the use cases that I see where people are using it and getting frustrated because they're not using it right, or idiotic ways of using it, are when people start asking questions about the wider world. They want to understand fact or fiction. They ask, is this true or not true? Or they ask scientific questions, hoping to get a real answer, and they don't get an answer that they want to get. Or questions about very specific and innovative fields that don't have a lot of free content available out online, right? Maybe you're in a research area where it's really, really quite narrow or new. And don't expect that when you start querying GPT, you're going to get accurate answers. So again, it should be used more as a tool, assistant tool, creative tool to help you with thinking through or brainstorming or helping you when you're stuck, but not to rely on the answers as factual. And finally, I highly don't recommend using it to start asking questions that are highly influenced by politics or social issues that are quite contentious. It has a tendency to just refuse to answer or to be very politically correct about it, but it won't really get you that far. Although you can use it as kind of a interlocutor to argue with or to give their opinions, which can be really good in general in a political sense, right? To give you counter arguments to whatever your beliefs are. But it can also be really good in a scientific context, right? Where you have a certain theory or base in mind, you want to explain results in a certain way, and you can ask it to challenge that theory and to come up with suggestions for how to strengthen the arguments that you're making. So that is the generative model. Now I want to give a second model, and I want to show you a tool that I think is really cool that you can use for a RAG system. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with the concept of a RAG system for GPT, but the RAG model was created in order essentially to try and say, well, if generic GPT is just this big polluted salad where all the words are mixed together, and there's no way to attribute back the sources of each particular comment or answer where it comes from. Well, RAG is an attempt to actually say, well, let's take a little bit of a different approach. The way that I think of RAG is, imagine you're out in the park with your dog and you throw a tennis ball out and the dog needs to go fetch it and bring it back to you. So that's how it kind of, the way I like to think about RAG systems for AI. So what I mean by that is, when you do a search through a RAG system, and we'll show you an example in a minute of how this works, essentially what you're doing is you are asking a question, and instead of it giving you a word salad, which is what we see in ChatGPT, it actually searches online and tries to find what are the websites that would be most, or what's the content that I have access to that would be the most appropriate, the best fitted to answer your question. Instead of chunking all the content, it only goes to those 6 or 7 sites or 8 sites, whatever it may be. It then studies those sites in particular, those pieces of content, could be an academic article, and comes back with answers that can be cited back to their original source. And that can be really helpful in the scientific context when I'm asking scientific questions, to be able to get a science-based answer and not an answer that's more factual. And that's what I think what most of us want to see. So it's essentially a search engine that's made for us, for scientists. And I want to show you one example of this. And this is a tool called Perplexity. You may be familiar with Perplexity. It's not a tool that's made only for science, but it is a tool that's made with the goal in mind of asking ourselves, can we create a tool where instead of Google, where the most popular answer pops up first, can we actually create a tool which answers our questions and at the same time gives us sources for those answers, that we can actually go and check and verify that those answers are correct. So if I go into perplexity.ai, and if you have your laptops in front of you or your phones, you're welcome to kind of do this alongside with me. You don't have to, though. You can always go ahead and do it later. I like to ask different kinds of questions and see what answers I get. Now, I do recommend you get 3 free pro searches per day. The pro searches tend to be more comprehensive, cover more sources. But let's say, I want to, and I can ask questions that are scientific, or I can just ask questions that are not scientific. But let's say I want to ask, excuse me, what is the psychology of conspiracy theory? Okay, I want to understand what is how, right? Is there? I mean, I obviously want to be more specific with my question, but just for the sake of argument, right? I want to understand what are kind of the psychological foundations of the need for people to to hear conspiracy theories, to believe conspiracy theories, etc. So let's say I just want to get an overview of kind of how that works. So I would go ahead and I would search that question. Oh, wait, actually, before I go ahead and do that, I want to show you one more thing that's really important. I can actually focus my search in a very important way. I can actually say, actually, I only want you to answer my question, not from the general internet, but actually only from academic text. So what I would do here is I'd click on academic. So what's the psychology of conspiracy theory? Click on academic. It's now doing a search. Now, interesting in the search, you can already kind of see what it's doing here. What it's doing is it's coming up with different variations of the search that I gave, right? So why people believe in conspiracy theories, psychology of conspiracy theories, psychological factors behind conspiracy theories. This is what I would do in theory in Google Scholar. If I was doing literature review, I would come up with different versions of my keywords, but here it's doing it for me. Now, what's really interesting is if you see here, it's actually giving me a number of articles, in this case, 8 articles, I believe, which actually in certain ways address my question one way or the answer. So it's showing me exactly how it got to my answer. I can click, by the way, on any of these articles. I can open them up. So here's an article from Frontiers. Mistrust and belief in conspiracy theories differently mitigates the effects of psychological factors on propensity for COVID-19 vaccine. That might be relevant. That looks interesting, right? So it's giving me the initial, where it initially came from, which is really, really valuable. Obviously, this is something that's missing from your general ChatGPT search. And the answer is, and then it gives me an actual answer that I can go and I can review, right? It talks about cognitive processes, emotional states, self-esteem and narcissism, social factors, political and ideological factors, et cetera, et cetera. Obviously it's something that you would want to carefully review, but hopefully you can find some really important, relevant information. Now, it also shows me how each source contributes to each part of the answer. So it's telling me that the cognitive processes, this is from the following article, Why Conspiracy Theorists Are Not Always Paranoid. Emotional states, right? So it's giving me 2 articles that it analyzed and that it reviewed carefully in order to come up with an answer to this part of the question, et cetera, et cetera. As I go down, I see the different parts of the question are composed of the different articles that it studied. I can then take that. It gives me some follow-up questions that I can go and ask. How do conspiracy theories impact mental health? What psychological traits are common among conspiracy theorists, et cetera, et cetera. If I want, I can actually ask a follow-up question if I didn't get a full answer here above, or I want it, or it's made me think about a totally new way of an aspect of this topic that I may not have thought of before, I can actually go ahead and ask a follow-up question. If you're teaching, I also recommend, you can see here that it also gives you some videos as well as images that may relate to the question at hand. Obviously, you need to go through each thing carefully. These aren't necessarily academic. You have to, kind of read through each one and see whether they're of value to you. So that is Perplexity. And again, that's an example, that's an example of of a search engine, which again, it's a combination of kind of the best of AI tools together with search to try and get real-time answers to my questions. Now, is this a full literature review? No, it's definitely not. There are other tools that are out there, such as SciSpace, Elicit, Cite. If you've come across any of those tools, do a really great job at doing some literature review work. But this is just to get simple academic research-based answers to questions. And I think this will become more and more popular over time. In fact, I've heard that Perplexity is so powerful that Google actually sees it as a potential competitor or a potential challenge to its domination, let's say, over the last 15 years. So what does this all mean? In the end of the day, and I'll leave you with this slide to think about, and if there's any questions, happy to take them, is that AI is not going to replace subject experts. But subject experts who know how to use AI will have a big advantage because they'll know how to query the literature, how to find sources better, faster, how to write up their papers in no time, and really just supercharge the work that you're doing. The goal here is not to replace researchers, but rather to give you the tools and the capabilities to do your work in less time so that you can go back and really do the stuff in the lab that you really enjoy doing. Again, I don't know if you can access this link because you're not on the Zoom, but I will leave it here. That if anyone wants to join the free boot camp that I mentioned at the beginning, it's a boot camp for researchers to write articles and grant proposals in half the time. It will be happening in January, so it's January 20th and January 27th. I believe it is starting at 5 o'clock UK time. I invite you all. It's free. Feel free. All you need to do is go and register, and I'd be happy to see you there. And we're going to expand upon a lot of the tools that are kind of new and really making a big difference when it comes to the world of research. So I think that is time. So I will end here. But if there's any questions, Olaf, happy to field them.
Thank you very much, Avi.